Hello everyone, welcome back to A Pictured Purpose. My name is Kira and today we're continuing what has unintentionally become a little bit of a series on my channel. It all started when I bought the most intimidating coloring books on my Amazon wishlist. Then I colored a page in the most intimidating book in my collection, and now here I am taking on the most intimidating coloring supplies. I asked you over on Instagram and YouTube which supplies scare you the most when you're coloring, and I've compiled this little chart here of the top 10. As you can see, we've got quite the mix going on: paint, markers, pastels, but the three that were most frequently mentioned were the Derwent Inktense pencils, neocolor 2s, and watercolors, and I'm going to be coloring with all three today. So without further ado, let's start off the intimidating coloring with the Derwent Inktense pencils. Now, I'm still a newbie when it comes to using these three supplies that I'll be coloring with today, so trust me, I'm right there with you when it comes to feeling intimidated. I got the Derwent Inktense for Christmas last year, and since then I've mainly tested them for basing, background details, as well as this gradient background here where I definitely encountered some bleed through issues. And I think that's one of the biggest concerns that make a lot of colorists feel nervous about the Derwent Inktense and really any water-soluble medium in general. If you're not careful with your water usage, you can definitely encounter some bleed-through problems. Plus, since the pigment in these pencils is technically ink, it becomes permanent once dry. That means you have to work relatively quickly, unlike standard watercolor pencils. But today I'm hoping to learn from my past mistakes, use some of the tips and tricks that you guys have shared with me, and finally break out of my Inktense intimidation phase. The page I'll be partially coloring today with the Derwent Inktense is from Forest and Nature by Rita Prince. It's actually a part of my 25 pages to color in 2025 challenge, and I chose this page for the space themed prompt. This was one of the many instances in that video where the coloring prompt jar wasn't very kind to me. So this was the best option for me to pick considering the prompt I got for this book. However, some of you suggested in the comments that I actually turned the back wall of the suitcase into a galaxy night sky, and I just thought that was a brilliant idea. So that is exactly what I decided to do today, as well as add a little bit of a galaxy effect in the background as well. Now, I am an absolute fan of any sort of galaxy effect in coloring pages. So over the past few months, I've been experimenting with different mediums to try and figure out what is the most effective way to achieve a galaxy background. So far, I've experimented with soft pastels, watercolors, oil pastels, and obviously today I'm now using Derwent Inktense. My approach for this page was to gradually build up the color in light layers, starting by applying the lightest colored pencils in my combination directly to the page for the first 1 to 2 layers, activating that with a water brush, and then progressively layering the darker shades on top by pulling the pigment directly from the pencil using the water brush again. And while the permanent nature of the Inktense is what makes them so intimidating, it's also one of the many reasons why they create such effective backgrounds. Because each layer barely affects the one underneath, you can really build up some depth, create some gorgeous effects, just like this galaxy background here. Since the previous Inktense mishap that I showed you earlier, I've really come to learn that using light layers is key to avoiding bleed-through issues in your coloring books, along with letting the paper dry in between those layers. Now, I'll be honest, I am probably one of the most impatient colorists on the planet. I absolutely hate waiting for my wet mediums to dry, but giving each layer as much drying time as possible will really help the integrity of the paper to bounce back. If you're too impatient, like I have frequently been in the past, piling on more and more wet media is really what's going to cause your paper texture to break down. And that's when you're going to run into some serious bleed through issues and or struggle to use regular pencils on top of it afterwards. So whenever you're working with inktense, see it as an exercise in patience. Or if you're short on time, just keep a heating tool on standby. Now, I will say that paper type and quality play a huge role in how your inktense or any wet media will perform in your coloring books. Whenever I'm testing out a new medium, especially one that's water soluble, I'll always test them out in my high quality coloring books first. This gives me the best sense of what the medium is truly capable of when paired with the right paper. It also reduces the chance of little mishaps, which means I'm way less likely to get super duper frustrated and abandon the medium altogether. I'm sure we've all been there at some point. Some of my go-to books for testing are Johanna Basford's, Melpomene Chetzepanagiotu's, Emily Lederhall-Oberg's, as well as Kirby Roseanne's. And if you're up to date with all of the videos on my channel, you'll know that I'm also obsessed with the paper quality in Sarah Renee Clark's new coloring book. Seriously, that book handles wet media like a dream. Then, once I feel comfortable and confident with the supply, I'll move on to experimenting in books that isn't as well suited for wet media, like Lulu Mayo's or even an Amazon printed coloring book. It's all about getting to know your supplies first and then adapting your techniques depending on the book that you're working in. I am happy to report that by using the light layering method and allowing enough drying time between each layer, I had 0 bleed through issues on this page. Hallelujah! Of course, this wouldn't have been a huge concern if I did have bleed through because this book is, for the most part, single-sided. But even if it wasn't, the backside illustration would have been completely intact. Now, the final step to bringing this galaxy effect to life was of course doing some starry details with white acrylic markers. You're gonna see me adding some white dots to pretty much every page that I'm working on in this video, just because I'm absolutely obsessed with doing it. They always add such a fun, glittery, magical effect to any coloring page without having the mess of actual glitter. And that wraps up the Derwent Inktense portion of this page. I am so excited to finish the rest of this page off camera, and I really think I've managed to make it work for the space-themed prompt. A massive thank you again to the lovely subscribers who suggested to add a galaxy background to the back of the suitcase here. It seriously came together so well and gave the page a really unique coloring twist too. Now it's time to move on to the second most intimidating supply on our list, which is the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2s. Before trying them this year, I was definitely intimidated by this supply because they're such an unusual medium. They may look like crayons, but they're technically classified as a water-soluble wax pastel. You can use them dry or activate them with water to create watercolor effects in your coloring books. And before this video, I had only ever used them for 3 different backgrounds. And every single time, they bled through to the other side. So let's see if I can avoid any bleed through issues today. I ended up choosing a page from Fairy Tales and Folklore by Emily Lederhall-Oberg, and I wanted to use this opportunity to not only create a more successful Neocolor 2 background, but also try my first ever mixed media background. Lately, I have been absolutely obsessed with pinning abstract and mixed media journaling spreads on Pinterest, so today was the day to finally try it out for myself. I picked up this photography book ages ago from an op shop, and I've already ripped out some pages for collaging purposes in the past, so I figured it was perfect to use for this project too. I ripped out one of the bridal pages from the back, which just felt very fitting since I'm currently in my bridal era, and then tore it up haphazardly and just played around a bit with how I wanted the pieces of ripped paper to sit on the page. Once I was happy with the placement, I made some quick mock stencils with some thin paper to help cut the pieces to fit neatly around the illustration. And then I just simply glued it all down with some very, very cheap craft glue. After all the fiddly bits were done, it was time to bring in the neocolor 2s. I've mentioned this a few times on the channel already, but in case this is the first video of mine that you're watching, I follow a very similar approach to the neos as I did with the inktense earlier. The first layer is all about color placement. I start by scribbling the pigment directly onto the page before activating it. Then for additional layers, I use a more controlled approach by pulling the pigment directly from the pastel with a water brush and then applying it to the page. However, in the past, I never let my neocolors fully dry between layers, so for this page, I made sure to do that, even though the impatient colorist within me was just screaming to keep going. One of the best things about the neocolors in comparison to the inktense is how beautifully they break down when activated with water. Unless you're using extremely heavy pressure, you can be pretty loose and scribbly with the first layer of color that you put down and not have to worry about any streak marks peeking through after the water activation. After finishing the main background work with the neos, it was time to add some doodly elements, and oh my goodness, I had such a blast doing this. There were two main reasons that I wanted to try some of the techniques from mixed media journaling. The first, of course, was the gorgeous end result that you can achieve. Whenever I look at mixed media or abstract art, I always get this immense feeling of creativity and freedom. There's just something so expressive about it. You can almost sense what the artist was experiencing in that moment without even looking at a detailed scene or recognizable object. The second reason was the therapeutic benefits. I think most of us in the coloring community fall in love with this hobby because it acts as a form of self-care. It helps us cope or escape from whatever struggles we're currently facing. And whilst coloring definitely does that for me and more, sometimes life is just really kicking me in the butt, and even the thought of coloring feels a little bit too much. Lately, I've been feeling that way a little bit more often than I'd like, which is why I thoroughly enjoyed incorporating mixed media journaling techniques into this background. It's exactly what my soul needed. Mixed media art journaling is all about expressing what you're feeling in that exact moment. There is immense creative freedom because there's literally no rules. Just layers of color, texture, and emotion coming together on the page. There was something so satisfying about layering the neos with the collage elements and then adding details with markers and pens. But more than that, it was incredibly fulfilling to experiment with zero pressure. If something didn't turn out the way that I expected, I could simply layer something else on top or shift the direction of the piece entirely. So yeah, as you can probably tell, I am now officially obsessed with adding mixed media backgrounds to my coloring pages. I will 100% be doing it again in the future because just look how fun the end result is. And even if you use the exact same media every time, there are just endless ways that the background could turn out. But I'm sure you're also wondering, Kira, did you have any bleed through? No, I did not. It looks like I finally figured out the key to solving my neocolor bleed through issue. I just needed to be a little less impatient and let the neos fully dry between layers. Patience really is a virtue, isn't it? Especially in adult coloring. We finally made it to the supply that's not only the most intimidating for you, but also for me, which is watercolors. Now, I've only ever ripped out 3 coloring pages in my time as an adult colorist, and those 3 times were all due to a watercolor and/or masking fluid mishap. And yet I've still decided to use both for this next page. Oh, I really don't give up, do I? That being said, I've also created some watercolor backgrounds in the past that I am really proud of. It's one of those mediums that is a total hit or a total miss for me. Today, I did play it a little bit safer by choosing a page from My Tiny Forest by Nina Stajner, which is printed on watercolor paper. And my goal was to create somewhat of a sunrise sky behind the hot air balloon here. To prep the page, I taped off the sides and bottom of the border and then masked off the edges of any of the elements that I didn't want to be painted with watercolors. I personally use a Winsor & Newton masking fluid, which you can find in my Amazon storefront if you like, and I always pour it into an old tablet case and apply it to the page using a silicone brush. What I've realized with the masking fluid is that the consistency is really important. You don't want it too thin, but you don't want it too thick. It's the constant Goldilocks issue. And unfortunately, there really is no magic formula that I can give you. It's all about experimenting on scrap pieces of paper or at the back of your coloring books till you figure out the optimal consistency for you. You also need to make sure that it is completely dry before you add the watercolors on top. Once again, this is a massive struggle for someone like me who is incredibly impatient, but it is necessary. When the masking fluid is no longer tacky to the touch, that's when you can dive in with your watercolor paints. Now, this was my first time diluting the watercolor pigment in a separate palette first and then applying it to the page, and I think it did make a considerable difference. I could control the saturation of the paint a lot easier and blend the next color into the previous one to achieve the smoothest transition between colors as possible. As you'll see in the footage, working with watercolors really is a trial and error process. Or at least it is for me as a complete watercolor novice. I'll add a little bit more pigment here, add some more water there, dab some pigment away with a finger. It's all about experimenting until I'm happy with the result. And in order to have at least some moderate success with my watercolors, I really do find that I have to let go of any sort of perfectionism. I have to accept that I won't have the same control and precision that I do with my other coloring supplies, and that's totally okay. I just need to trust the process and let the watercolors do their thing. And then hopefully at the end, I'll still have a page that I'm happy with, even if it looks a little bit different than I initially anticipated. And that's exactly what happened here as well. Originally, I had planned for a soft pastel sunrise, but through the process, the colors ended up being a lot more saturated than I expected. But that doesn't mean I'm still not happy with the end result, it's just a little bit different than I imagined. I will be honest though, I wasn't completely satisfied with the transition between the colors. I would have liked the blend to have been a tiny bit more seamless. So to help camouflage the imperfections, I decided to bring in my trusty white acrylic markers to save the day. I started by using a white Artex brush marker to create some translucent, soft cloud shapes, then added some opaque white highlights with my Simp Tack marker, blended this out a little bit more with a water brush, and of course I couldn't resist adding a few white dots around the edges with my Ohuhu fine tip acrylic marker. Before removing the masking fluid and tape, I did make sure that the watercolors were completely dry. I really wanted to avoid any smudging or messing up of the work that I had already done. And did I end up ripping my page during the removal process? Unfortunately, yes, I did. Oh, we were on such a good streak. There were 3 tiny spots where the page ripped just slightly. One was from the masking tape along the border, and the other 2 were from the masking fluid where I know I just applied it a little bit too thickly onto the page. But I'm still viewing this as a success because this is the least amount of ripping I've had on a page ever since I've started using masking fluid. Progress has been made, people. Yeah, I really think that masking fluid and watercolors are just my coloring kryptonite. There's something about the combination of those two mediums that just don't gel with my brain and my hands. But that's totally fine. I'm coming to terms with the fact that it's probably just gonna take me a little bit longer to wrap my head around those two mediums. And as long as I improve a little bit each time, then that's all I can ask for. So there we have it, everyone. That was me coloring with some of your most intimidating coloring supplies. But I'd love to know what you think. Should I do a part 2 to this video where I color with some of the other most intimidating supplies on our top 10 list? Or perhaps I should dive into coloring with some of the supplies that I find the most intimidating. I think at the top of my list would be polychromos, water-based markers, distressed ink, and stencils. Yeah, those 4 strike a little bit of fear into my coloring heart. Oh, and also leave me a rainbow emoji if you made it to this part of the video. I love seeing the comments section filled with color and seeing who makes it to the very end. You are the true MVPs. Until next time, happy coloring, friends. Have a good day, have a good life, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.